The old woman thought it would be just another quiet morning on her empty village street, until she heard tiny footsteps racing toward her. A little puppy, trembling from head to toe, skidded to a stop in front of her and rose onto his hind legs. Begging, his paws shook, his eyes glistened, and his whimpers were filled with desperation. At first, she thought he wanted food. Then she realized he wanted her. The puppy tugged at her clothes, pulling her toward something hidden deep within the alleys. Every time she stopped, he cried harder. And when the old woman finally followed him to the place he desperately wanted her to see, what she found left everyone speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The morning sun had just begun to warm the narrow street as the old woman stepped outside, her shawl wrapped tightly around her thin shoulders. Every day started the same slow, careful steps, a soft smile for the empty road, and a quiet prayer whispered into the breeze. She had lived alone for many years now, with only her morning walks keeping her company. The silence never bothered her. In fact, she welcomed it. It was the one part of her day that felt predictable, peaceful, and safe. But today, something felt different. She had barely taken 10 steps when a strange rustling sound reached her ears. The old woman paused, turning slowly toward the corner of the street. Out of the shadows, a tiny golden puppy stumbled into the light, thin, dusty, and trembling from head to tail. Before she could react, the puppy hurried toward her and suddenly rose onto his hind legs. His tiny paws pressed together as if he were pleading, his eyes wide with desperation. It wasn't the usual excitement of a playful dog. This was something else: fear, urgency, a silent cry for help. The old woman's heart tightened. Something was terribly wrong. The old woman slowly crouched, extending a gentle hand toward the trembling puppy. "It's all right, little one," she whispered. But the puppy didn't come closer. Instead, he backed away a few steps, then looked at her with desperate eyes. Suddenly, he let out a soft, urgent whine and turned his head toward the narrow path behind the abandoned houses. He ran a few steps, paused, and looked back at her, begging her to follow. She straightened slowly, confusion knitting her brows. "What are you trying to show me?" The puppy barked a tiny, frightened sound and tugged lightly at the hem of her dress before running ahead. Once more, he didn't want food. He needed help. The old woman hesitated at the edge of the narrow passage. The abandoned alley had always unsettled her: crumbling walls, scattered trash, and a silence that felt heavier than anywhere else in the neighborhood. She had avoided it for years, but the puppy stood inside it now, looking back at her with pleading eyes. He whimpered softly, shifting from paw to paw as if time were running out. With a steadying breath, she tightened her grip on her shawl and stepped forward. Each step felt slower, heavier, as the dim alley swallowed the warm daylight behind her, whatever waited ahead. She knew it wasn't ordinary. A few steps in, the old woman noticed the ground beneath her feet change. The dusty alley floor was disturbed: fresh marks, scattered dirt, and small scratches that didn't belong there. Her heartbeat quickened. The puppy hurried ahead, stopping beside a torn piece of cloth tangled around a broken crate. The fabric was faded, but there was something unsettling about the way it was ripped, as if tugged by desperate hands. Nearby lay a dented metal bowl, still holding a few dry crumbs. Someone or something had been here recently. The old woman knelt to examine the cloth, a chill creeping up her spine. Nothing about this place felt abandoned anymore. The puppy darted forward again, weaving through the clutter until he reached the farthest corner of the alley, an area so dark the old woman could barely see anything inside. He stopped there, tail tucked, ears lowered, and let out a trembling whine. She stepped closer, her breath catching as her eyes adjusted to the shadows. That was when she heard it, a faint, irregular sound, like someone struggling to breathe. It echoed softly against the walls, fragile and haunting. The old woman froze. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't imagination. Something alive was hidden in that darkness. And whatever it was, it needed help urgently. With trembling hands, the old woman gently pushed aside a pile of old cardboard leaning against the wall. A cold wave of dread washed over her as the shadows parted. There, curled tightly against the bricks, lay an older dog, frail, skeletal, and barely clinging to life. Her fur was matted, her ribs painfully visible, her breaths shallow and uneven. One cloudy eye struggled to open, flickering with fear before softening at the sight of the puppy beside her. The puppy rushed to her side, nudging her weak muzzle, whining in desperate affection. It was his mother, abandoned, injured, and fading fast. The old woman felt her throat tighten. No creature should suffer like this. She knelt beside them, tears welling as she whispered, "Oh dear, how long have you been fighting alone?" It was a discovery that shattered her heart. The old woman wiped her eyes, gathering strength she hadn't felt in years. She slid her arms beneath the weakened dog, lifting her with surprising steadiness for someone her age. The mother dog whimpered softly, but didn't resist. She was too exhausted to fight. The puppy followed closely, circling her feet as if afraid she might disappear again. "Don't worry," she whispered, tightening her grip. "I won't leave her." With careful steps, she carried the fragile dog toward the street, her heart pounding with urgency. She called out for help, her voice echoing across the quiet neighborhood. For the first time in a long while, she refused to walk away from someone who needed her. Her voice, usually soft and gentle, carried through the street with unexpected strength. Within moments, doors opened and curious faces appeared. A young man hurried toward her, stunned at the sight of the limp dog in her arms. Others gathered around, whispering in disbelief. The puppy barked anxiously, pacing between the woman and the crowd, as if urging them to move faster. Someone rushed inside their home and returned with blankets. Another offered to drive them to the nearest vet. Almost instantly, the quiet street transformed into a small rescue team. United by shock and compassion, no one could understand how the dogs had survived this long. The moment they reached the vet clinic, the staff rushed forward, lifting the mother dog from the old woman's arms and placing her onto a stretcher. The bright lights of the emergency room made every wound, every rib, every labored breath painfully visible. The old woman clasped her hands tightly, her heart trembling with fear. Inside, the vet examined the dog quickly, his expression turning grave. "She's critically weak," he murmured. "Malnourished, dehydrated. And she's been like this for a long time." The puppy scratched at the glass door, crying desperately each time his mother whimpered. The old woman refused to leave the hallway, her eyes fixed on the treatment room. She paced slowly, whispering prayers under her breath. For the first time in years, every minute felt like a lifetime, and every second mattered. Hours passed with no news, and the old woman felt each one pressing heavily on her heart. The puppy curled at her feet, shivering every time a distant sound reminded him of his mother. She gently stroked his tiny head, whispering, "She's strong. She's fighting." Finally, the treatment room door opened. The vet stepped out, tired but smiling softly. "She made it through the night," he said. "It's a miracle she held on long enough for someone to find her." The old woman exhaled in relief, covering her mouth with trembling hands. The vet crouched beside the puppy. "He led you perfectly," he added. He knew exactly who to trust. The puppy wagged his tail weakly, as if proud of the hope he had carried. The next morning, the old woman returned to the clinic just as the sun began to rise. The mother dog lifted her head weakly when she saw her, and the puppy bounded forward with a tiny bark of joy. The woman reached out, her eyes softening. "You're safe now," she whispered. When the vet brought them outside, neighbors waiting nearby fell silent. No one expected such a transformation. the weak dog now fighting to live, the puppy glued to her side, and the old woman standing proudly between them. She announced she would adopt both dogs, promising them a home filled with warmth they'd never known. The neighborhood watched in awe, speechless at the bond a tiny puppy had created.